He Got Game, 1998, starring Denzel Washington and Ray Allen. Welcome back to Streetball Strategies basketball movie reviews. He Got Game is directed by Spike Lee and is the story of Jesus Shuttlesworth, who is a high school senior, #1 prospect in the country trying to decide where he's going to go after high school. His father, who's in prison, who Jesus hates, is told by the warden of the prison that the governor of the state is a huge fan of one of the local schools, and if Denzel, Jake, can get his son Jesus to go to that school, he is then potentially up for early parole by the governor. So then Jake is released from prison for a week to try to get his son to go to the governor's school. First, let's talk about the things I enjoy about this movie, starting with the cast. The cast is great, made up by Denzel Washington and Mila Jovovich and Rosario Dawson. It's a great cast and they do a really good job. The second thing I enjoyed about the movie are the multiple storylines. There are multiple storylines for multiple characters. I guess that's one of the criticisms that came out when this movie was released, which was that there were too many subplot lines happening in this movie, but I found them all interesting and I wanted to see them all play themselves out. Third of all is Spike Lee's obvious ambition in making this movie. He obviously wanted to make a movie that was kind of outside the box of normal Hollywood basketball movies, and he tried different things to differentiate himself in this movie from those other mainstream Hollywood basketball movies. And I appreciate the creativity, I appreciate the ambition in trying to do so. The problem is, a lot of the time, a lot of that stuff didn't work for me. So let's get into my criticisms of this movie, starting at the beginning of the film, where at the beginning of the film there is this montage of different kids playing basketball, shooting around by themselves or playing games with other kids. It's all beautifully shot and beautifully done, except for the part where it doesn't have anything to do with the rest of the movie. These are just random basketball players in random locations playing beautifully shot basketball, but it has nothing to do with the rest of the movie. And because of that, from the very beginning, I found myself confused as to why I was seeing this. And as I've said in the past, confusing is the worst thing any entertainment medium can be. Confusing is actually worse than being bad, because if something is bad, then you can just decide that it's bad and choose not to partake in it any longer. But when something's confusing, now you have to figure out whether or not it's good or bad, or whether or not you would like it or enjoy it or not. And while you're trying to figure that out, you're not immersed in the movie the way you should be. And then on top of that montage scene, you start to hear the score of the movie. And at first, the score is beautiful, it sounds good. But as the montage continues, the drama in the score of the movie builds and builds and builds. And the score is orchestral, and it starts to build and build in drama to the point where it starts to sound as if it's the kind of score you would hear in a horror movie. And I didn't understand that, and it's distracting when the score of the movie is overly dramatic to the point of sounding like a horror movie. That took me out of the movie from the beginning as well. And sticking with the score, it's ever present throughout the movie. I would say it's probably present in the movie for about 85% of the movie, or at least it felt that way. It feels like 85% of the movie is the score, 5% of the movie is the soundtrack, which is primarily done by Public Enemy, which isn't a problem because the soundtrack does sound good, and then the rest of the 10% of the movie is just silence without soundtrack or the score. And you're not supposed to realize that the score is actually taking place, that you're actually hearing it, because it's only supposed to be there to enhance the emotion of a scene without you noticing it. It's supposed to enhance a scene without distracting you from the scene. But in He Got Game, the score is just always there. It's always present. And especially in scenes where there's two actors on scene and one actor has a lot of exposition, and it's pretty much a scene where the first actor has a speech and they're speeching to the second character. And yes, the second character does interject from time to time, but the main focus of the scene is the exposition from the first character. And while this is happening, the score is constantly playing and you're constantly hearing it. And what makes it even worse is that the score is usually more dramatic than the scene calls for. Thus, you notice the score, and when you notice the score, it takes you out of the movie because it reminds you that you're not just watching two people have a conversation, you're watching one character speaking to the second character in a movie. And when asked about the score of the film, this is what Spike Lee said.
Roll tape. Take a look at this clip and we'll come back. Here it is.
I don't know yet. I have to weigh my options.
You got any idea?
Like I told the rest of the world, I don't know yet.
I pray that you understand. The music is Aaron Copland.
Right.
Why Aaron Copland?
Instead of hiring a composer, I was going to go through his life works and pick out the stuff I felt would be appropriate for this film. With the cooperation of the Aaron Copland estate and Sony Classics, they made it all possible.
And that's perfectly fine. I'm an Aaron Copland fan as well, but geez, Spike, you ran this score into the ground, you oversaturated the movie with it, and you used it to make the movie more dramatic than it felt that it was, and it just didn't work. Every fourth or fifth scene in this movie feels like it was written as a play. It feels like you're watching a stage play take place. One, because of how dramatic the score is during the dialogue of these scenes, but also just because of how they're written. It just feels like you're watching a stage play. The majority of the scenes in the movie feel like you're watching movie scenes, but then every fourth or fifth scene feels like it's written for a play. And maybe that was Spike Lee's intention. Maybe he intended the movie to take that kind of a turn. Again, referencing back to the potential ambition that Spike Lee put into this film, which was maybe he thought that at some point he was going to take this movie and make it into a play. But when you're watching the movie, it doesn't work because the majority of the film feels like a movie, but then you get these scenes that feel like a play and it's distracting. I wouldn't be surprised if one of the reasons the score is ever present in this movie, especially in dialogue scenes, especially in the dialogue scenes with Ray Allen, is to help cover up his ineptitude as an actor. And that's probably my biggest problem with this movie, is that the main character, the main actor in this movie, is not a good actor. It's not even that he's a bad actor. It's just that whatever the opposite of charismatic is, that's Ray Allen. He's not a bad actor. He just constantly feels unnatural, unorganic. He always feels stilted and forced when he has his dialogue. Really, the only dialogue that doesn't feel forced and stilted is when he's talking about girls and partying with girls and how they're going to be there when he becomes rich and famous. Those scenes, when he's talking about that stuff, which is few and far between, that stuff feels natural, but everything else feels very stilted and forced. And then especially when you put him in scenes one-on-one with the likes of like Rosario Dawson or Denzel Washington, who are trained, experienced, well-rounded actors, when you put Ray Allen one-on-one with them in a scene, it's even more obvious that he's not a good actor. And it's even more obvious that Rosario and Denzel are working as hard as they can to try to bring the best out of Ray Allen in these scenes, and it just feels stilted and forced, and it's a lot of it is cringeworthy, to be honest. This is one of many reasons that I wish I would have seen the director's commentary of this movie to understand Spike Lee's choices in the movie such as these. So this was the only interview that I could find from Spike Lee speaking about this movie, but at the beginning of this interview, Spike Lee says,
here's my question. Is this a movie really about basketball, or is this a movie about fathers and sons and the nature?
I'll expand that, Joe. I think this film is about parents and children.
So he says this is not a basketball movie, this is a father-son relationship movie, and I'm completely fine with that. Jesus Shuttlesworth could have been any kind of athlete. He could have been playing any kind of sport. He could have been doing anything where you would get recruited by the college or the pros and there's potential fortune and fame in your near future. He didn't have to be a basketball player. But when asked about why an NBA player had to play this role, this is what Spike said.
Why did you have to have an NBA player to play this important role of the son?
Because it would have been a riskier move getting an actor to show those skills that we needed on the court. The reason why a lot of basketball films, I think, fail is because they get actors to play basketball players. I think that you can get away with that somewhat in boxing films, baseball films, football films. But for basketball, you need somebody who can play. And there's no actor today I know that has skills like they could be, like they're pro material. It's just not possible. And if you don't have someone who could play like that, that means that it really contains how you shoot basketball sequences.
Except for there's almost no basketball played in this movie. You almost never see a basketball in Ray Allen's hands. There's one pickup game that's played, and it's pretty short, and a lot of the action in that pickup game is Ray Allen dunking. It's not a lot of skill in being able to dunk a basketball on film. Other than that, you never see Jesus working on his game. You never see him practicing. You never see him working out. You occasionally see him shooting three-pointers by himself, but that's about it. The only other basketball scene in the movie is the one-on-one scene with him and Denzel Washington. And just as how, because Denzel is such a good actor, it makes Ray Allen look even worse in their acting dialogue scenes in the one-on-one basketball game, because Ray Allen's a polished NBA player with sharp NBA skills, and he's playing against a okay at best basketball player in Denzel Washington, who is also 44 years old at the time. It doesn't showcase Jesus as a basketball player. It more so points out that Denzel Washington, Jake Shuttlesworth, is not that great of a basketball player anymore. So because of the lack of basketball played in this movie, I don't see a reason for there to be a need to have a NBA player as the star in this movie. There's way more acting, there's way more dialogue than there is basketball action in this movie. And if you're going to have an NBA player, at least have an NBA player who's charismatic. I'm sure there could have been a solid teenage or 20-something-year-old actor that Spike Lee could have found to play this role who was also decent at playing basketball. And I get it. Wood Harris was too old to play this role. Rob Brown was too young, but Spike Lee could have found somebody, some actual actor. I completely disagree with Spike that he had to have an NBA player. He should have had an actor who was also good at basketball. I'm sure there are actors out there at that time who could have played this role much, much better than Ray Allen. So is He Got Game a good movie? Well, it has all these faults and it has all these distractions that take you out of the narrative far too often. But regardless of that, it does tell the story fairly well, regardless of all of that. Yes, it's very oftenly distracting, but I don't regret watching it. I don't feel like it was a mistake. I did enjoy the movie, even though all of those distractions were very present a lot of the time. Did the movie accomplish what it was trying to do? Yes, but it doesn't really get resolved in a way that is satisfying to me. The ending of the movie is kind of ambiguous, and I'm assuming that it was intended to be. And if that's the kind of movie, if that's the kind of ending you like, then I'm assuming that you will enjoy this movie very much. For me, I'm much simpler. I like a beginning, middle, and end, and when the end comes, I like it to be all tied up in a bow, and like that's it, that's the end. And while you understand the ending of the movie, it doesn't really get resolved, and it doesn't really feel satisfying to me, because ambiguous isn't really what I look for in movies. That doesn't mean it's good or bad, it's just not what I prefer. But yes, in terms of telling the story of Jesus and his father and their relationship, if that was the point of the movie, it did get explored and it was entertaining. Should you see this movie? Should you experience it? Well, I mean, if you're a Spike Lee fan, a Denzel fan, a Rosario Dawson fan, then you've probably already seen this movie and you probably already enjoyed it. But as far as the casual movie fan or the casual basketball fan, I don't really see why it's necessary for you to see this movie. It's not all over the place, it's pretty linear. The story's told pretty well in a linear kind of fashion, but it also is pretty distracting, and I think it would be a disappointment to a casual movie fan. And to a basketball movie fan who's watching this movie specifically for basketball, I think you're going to be disappointed as well, because even though Ray Allen is a NBA All-Star level basketball player, you don't see him playing much basketball in this movie. So regardless of all of the distractions and all of the problems that I've noted with this movie, I still think it's above average, and I do think that Spike Lee's ambition and creativity should be taken into account when grading this movie. I do appreciate his ambition. I do appreciate him trying to be creative and thinking outside the box when making this movie. A lot of the times, a lot of it didn't work for me, but I still do appreciate it. Because of that, I will give He Got Game a C+. So thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed this review. I understand for those of you who may not agree with it, you could say that this movie is just too deep for me, it's too creative for me, it's too ambitious for me, and so I just don't get it. You could say that it's just above my head and I just don't have the kind of appreciation for it that I should have. And maybe you're right. I'm completely open to that possibility. It just didn't really work for me overall. If you found this review helpful, a thumbs up would be great, and if you could hit that subscribe button, that would be great as well, because that really helps me out. And make sure you hit that notification bell so you're notified of the last couple movies on this Esquire.com Best Basketball Movie list. And until then, I will see you guys in the next review.
We, East Champs, dog, did it right.